7 shocking facts about the sexual life of Henry VIII. To utterly destroy a monumental, centuries-old religion simply to claim a single woman as a bride, only to personally push her toward the executioner's block less than 1,000 days later. Behind the glittering, opulent throne of England lay a brutal, deeply harrowing bedchamber. History remembers this monarch as a tyrant, but the true, sinister root of his madness stemmed from a paranoid, almost suffocating obsession with reproduction. What exactly was the catalyst that twisted a seemingly perfect, golden god of the Renaissance into a grotesque, 400-pound behemoth who viewed women as mere biological tools, machinery to be ruthlessly slaughtered the moment they malfunctioned? Linger with us until the very final moments of this journey, and you will witness the unmasking of the 7 darkest, most chilling truths surrounding the deeply disturbed romantic and sexual life of King Henry VIII. By the time the screen fades to black, you will fully comprehend why the fragile, wounded pride of a delusional man proved to be infinitely more devastating and far more lethal than any theater of war. Part 1. Sharing a bed with the older sister before tearing the nation apart to marry the younger. The question that has eternally echoed through the halls of history is this: did Henry VIII ever truly love the Boleyn sisters? Or were they merely disposable pawns on a visceral chessboard where he always held the absolute upper hand? To untangle this dark web of truth, we must step backward through the corridors of time to the 1520s, within the echoing walls of Greenwich Palace. Picture this: the lavender violently clashing with the suffocating aroma of melting scented wax. That was the exact, stifling atmosphere of the royal masquerade balls, a place where the fragile boundary between rigid courtly etiquette and absolute, unbridled debauchery was terrifyingly thin. Amidst the swirling sea of aristocrats stood a woman celebrated as the English Rose. Mary Boleyn. She did not possess the razor-sharp, calculating intellect of her younger sister, but she was armed with a gentle, yielding beauty that mirrored the softest strokes of a Renaissance masterpiece, Henry VIII. Then, at the absolute, vibrant zenith of his physical prime, swiftly locked his predatory gaze upon Mary. Yet, there is a glaring detail that romanticized cinematic portrayals conveniently gloss over. Mary Boleyn was already a married woman. On a freezing winter night in 1522, Henry slipped away from the marital bed of Queen Catherine of Aragon, a woman who was already physically and emotionally hollowed out by a devastating string of miscarriages. He navigated the labyrinthine, pitch-black corridors of the palace to arrive at Mary Boleyn's chambers, in the flickering, unstable glow of the hearth fire. Mary understood a terrifying reality. She possessed absolutely no right to refuse the King of England. This clandestine arrangement dragged on for years. But make no mistake, this was never love. It was sheer, unadulterated possession. Mary eventually gave birth to 2 children, Catherine and Henry Carey. The entire court was engulfed in deafening whispers that the young boy, Henry Carey, bore the exact flaming red hair and the distinctively broad, towering forehead of the monarch. But do you know what Henry VIII did? He chose absolute, chilling ignorance. He turned a completely blind eye. The high-ranking courtiers of the era were left in a state of silent astonishment. Watching a child completely devoid of royal titles parading around with the undeniable biological signature of the Tudor bloodline. There were quiet afternoons when Henry VIII would stride down the grand galleries, his gaze accidentally brushing against that very child, the living, breathing culmination of his passionate, illicit nights with Mary. Yet, instead of offering a warm embrace or a quiet, fatherly acknowledgement, the king simply offered a frozen stare and kept walking. For Henry, the moment the intoxicating thrill of physical conquest evaporated, any resulting consequences, even a living soul carrying his own blood, metamorphosed into heavy, inconvenient burdens that needed to be violently erased from his narrative. This icy indifference was not born of ignorance. It was a calculated refusal to let anything impede his relentless pursuit of a new toy. When Mary's youthful radiance began to inevitably dim under the heavy toll of childbirth, Henry callously swept her into the shadows, discarding her like a broken trinket. He no longer desired an obedient, submissive mistress. His ego hungered for a fresh, impossible challenge. And that was precisely the moment Anne Boleyn stepped into the light. The true, stomach-churning horror lies right here. Henry commenced his aggressive, obsessive pursuit of Anne, while the residual warmth of her older sister still lingered on his mattress. Anne, standing in stark, defiant contrast to Mary, looked the most powerful man in the world in the eye and said no. She flatly refused to be relegated to the status of a temporary, disposable mistress. She did not want his bed. She wanted his crown. Imagine the scene of his palace, his eyes feverishly tracking Anne Boleyn as she rode her horse across the sprawling estates. He descended into such a state of absolute mania that he penned letters to Anne, writings that, in our modern lexicon, would undeniably be classified as graphic. Desperate sexting, he swore binding, eternal oaths that he belonged entirely to Anne, while Mary, the older sister who had surrendered her body and reputation to him, was forced to stand bitterly in the cold shadows, watching her younger sister ascend to the dizzying, dangerous pinnacle of absolute power. This brand of cruelty extended far beyond the parchment of hidden love letters. The historical record bears witness to the public. Humiliating degradation Mary was forced to endure as the regime violently shifted its allegiance. When Henry set his sights on Anne, Mary was not granted the mercy of leaving the court. Instead, she was forced to remain and serve as a lowly lady-in-waiting, day after day. She was subjected to the psychological torture of watching her sister being showered with priceless jewels and elevated to the prestigious title of Marquess of Pembroke. Meanwhile, Mary herself was violently erased from relevance, morphing into a fading, transparent ghost, a thoroughly depleted tool whose expiration date had passed. This specific truth strips away the gilded facade to reveal a deeply sociopathic nature. Henry VIII harbored absolutely zero regard for basic morality or the sanctity of familial bonds. Engaging in intimate, physical relations with two blood sisters was, under the strict tenets of the Church and the legal frameworks of the era, viewed as an abhorrent, forbidden taboo and a catastrophic violation of human decency. But Henry did not care to possess Anne, to satiate the burning, egotistical desire to conquer the one woman who dared to reject him. He was willing to plunge the entirety of England into chaos, rip apart a 1,000-year-old bond with the Pope, and shove Mary Boleyn into a pit of permanent, historical oblivion. This was no grand, sweeping romance. This was the terrifying genesis of a deeply pathological pattern. Henry VIII loved with the destructive, manic intensity of a spoiled child fixated on a shiny new toy, and once he finally secured it, he was more than willing to violently shatter it into pieces the second it failed to provide him with absolute amusement. Part 2. Bedding his wife's lady-in-waiting while his wife carried his child. If history were to host an award ceremony for sheer, unadulterated sociopathy, Henry VIII would undoubtedly sweep the categories. In Henry's deeply warped psychological landscape, a wife's pregnancy was not a sacred period requiring tenderness, protection, or paternal anticipation. Rather, he viewed it as a highly inconvenient intermission that directly interfered with his personal gratification. In the bleak, freezing month of November 1518, the royal palace was submerged in a suffocating, heavy atmosphere of tension. Queen Catherine of Aragon was navigating the agonizing final weeks of her pregnancy. She was physically depleted, aging at an unnaturally rapid pace after enduring a soul-crushing sequence of stillbirths, miscarriages, and failed deliveries. Yet, at that exact moment, hidden away in another opulent wing of the palace, Elizabeth Bessie Blount, a strikingly radiant, youthful lady-in-waiting who directly served the Queen herself, was clandestinely basking in the king's fervent, illicit favors. Henry was entirely devoid of guilt, as Bessie's abdomen began to swell with undeniable evidence of their affair. Henry, rather than facing the consequences of his actions, conspired with his ruthless right-hand man, Cardinal Wolsey, to engineer a highly elaborate cover-up. Bessie was secretly escorted to the remote, isolated Augustinian priory of St. Lawrence in Blackmore, a shadowy sanctuary cryptically referred to by insiders as Jericho, to deliver the child in absolute secrecy. The agonizing irony of history lies in this singular, macabre timeline. In that very same November of 1518, as Catherine screamed in agony to deliver a lifeless, stillborn daughter, completely drowning in the despair of a queen unable to fulfill her singular biological duty, her husband was pacing impatiently, eagerly awaiting the birth of his bastard child from his wife's own servant. The sheer contrast between the Queen's bleeding tragedy and the King's illicit anticipation is nothing short of skin-crawling. The historical archives reveal that the compensation for this betrayal was astronomical. While Catherine was left entirely alone in the suffocating darkness of her grief, mourning the loss of yet another child, Bessie Blount was showered with extravagant royal bounties following her successful delivery. The king himself personally orchestrated an incredibly prestigious, highly lucrative marriage for her with Gilbert Taleboys, the first Baron Taleboys of Kyme. Henry did not merely commit adultery, he weaponized the absolute, divine power of the crown to elevate his mistress, building her fortune directly upon the shattered physical and psychological remains of his grieving wife. Decades later, this exact horrifying script would be flawlessly reenacted, but with an entirely new victim taking center stage: Anne Boleyn. In 1533, while Anne was heavily pregnant with the future Queen Elizabeth I, Henry's wandering, insatiable eye locked onto Jane Seymour, And who was Jane? She was, chillingly, a lady-in-waiting serving Anne Boleyn. In 1536, Eustace Chapuis, the imperial ambassador of the Holy Roman Empire, and arguably one of the most razor-sharp, astute political observers of the entire Tudor era, documented an event that would trigger a catastrophic, bloody turning point. According to these meticulously preserved diplomatic dispatches, Anne Boleyn unexpectedly walked into a room and was confronted with a sight that would shatter her world. Her husband, the king, sitting with Jane Seymour intimately perched upon his lap, openly showering her with brazen, affectionate gestures. The psychological shockwave that violently struck Anne was so overwhelmingly catastrophic that, merely days later, she suffered a devastating miscarriage, losing a male fetus. As Anne lay completely immobilized in her blood-soaked bed, emotionally and physically eviscerated by the loss of the male heir that served as her sole political life raft, Henry casually strolled into her chambers. With eyes devoid of a single shred of humanity, he coldly declared that he now saw clearly that God will not give me male children by you. The absolute malice here lies in the fact that Henry recycled the exact same psychological warfare he had previously utilized to annihilate Catherine, turning it directly onto Anne. Anne had not merely lost the battle for her husband's fickle heart, she experienced the horrifying realization that she had been downgraded from a beloved wife to a malfunctioning biological obstacle that Henry was actively, aggressively eager to bulldoze. Henry no longer looked at Anne with an ounce of lingering affection. He saw only a broken machine sputtering on the factory floor, and his gaze was already locked onto Jane Seymour, the shiny, brand new, seemingly flawless replacement part that promised to be significantly more submissive. Henry possessed zero patience for Anne's recovery. The cruelty peaked at an unimaginable crescendo when he callously signed Anne's death warrant, dispatching her to be executed on May 19, 1536. And then, merely one single day later, while the soil absorbing Anne's blood was still fresh and wet, Henry officially announced his betrothal to Jane Seymour. Henry VIII was utterly terrified of being alone. He perpetually ensured a spare part was fully secured and waiting in the wings before he initiated the destruction of the old model. Part 3. More loyal than any European monarch of his era, yet no one knew it. We now arrive at what is arguably the most staggering, paradoxical truth of Henry VIII's entire existence. If you place him side by side with his legendary contemporaries, titans like King Francis I of France or the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, Henry actually emerges as a bizarrely model husband when solely evaluating the sheer, mathematical volume of mistresses. Why would a man eternally branded by history as a ravenous, insatiable glutton for lust actually possess so few documented paramours? The answer is buried within a highly peculiar, deeply flawed medical superstition that gripped the era. Henry harbored a rigid, unshakable belief that engaging in intimate, physical intercourse with a woman while she was pregnant would inflict direct, catastrophic harm upon the health of both the mother and the developing fetus. Consequently, he strictly limited his external releases, only seeking out the beds of mistresses when his wives had entered the late, untouchable stages of their pregnancies. Furthermore, in stark contrast to the French monarchs, who proudly, almost arrogantly paraded their official royal mistresses in broad daylight. Henry shrouded his illicit affairs in absolute, suffocating darkness. He was deeply, almost neurotically obsessed with cultivating the public image of a pious, God-fearing, morally untouchable sovereign. Yet, it was precisely this half-baked, hypocritical loyalty that served as the very catalyst for his kingdom's bloodiest tragedies. Examine the mechanics of neighboring royal courts. In Paris, King Francis I would confidently clasp the hand of his mistress and stroll down the grand halls of his palace, viewing his infidelity not as a sin, but as a glittering symbol of his masculine vitality and sovereign privilege. Meanwhile, in the English court, bewildered foreign ambassadors consistently dispatched reports describing a monarch who appeared impossibly devout, attending Mass daily and meticulously performing every public ritual of deep reverence and respect toward his queen. The reality, however, was not that Henry lacked burning, carnal desires, but rather that he was hopelessly trapped inside a suffocating, bulletproof vest of his own hypocritical morality. By refusing to openly indulge in his vices like his royal peers, his repressed, tightly coiled urges festered under extreme pressure. And when that pressure cooker finally exploded, it did not merely result in a fleeting, scandalous bedroom affair. It ignited a vicious, blood-soaked revolution. When the vast majority of other kings grew tired of their wives, they simply, quietly acquired a new mistress, allowing their aging queens to sit undisturbed on the throne. Henry, however, was built differently. He refused to accept the label of an adulterer. His ego demanded a legally recognized, fully sanctioned new wife to provide him with an unquestionable male heir. The enduring monstrous reputation of Henry VIII as a lustful tyrant was not forged because he bedded too many women. It was forged because he possessed the terrifying audacity to systematically annihilate every single law of the Catholic Church, forcefully sever an entire nation's spiritual umbilical cord from Rome, and violently upend the fundamental religious framework of his people, all simply to secure a legal divorce. The toxic, all-consuming paranoia that his future son must be 100% legitimate practically drove Henry to the brink of insanity. He vastly preferred to violently shred a millennium of holy connection with the Vatican, choosing to arrogantly declare himself the supreme head of the Church of England so he could grant himself permission to marry, rather than accept the quiet, parallel life of quiet infidelity practiced by every other monarch. This twisted, uncompromising loyalty to the concept of needing an official wife was the very blade that backed the women in his life into a lethal corner. They were either elevated to queen, or they were condemned as treasonous traitors facing the absolute maximum penalty of death. He completely eradicated any middle ground. Henry did not choose the path of quiet, shadowy philandering. He chose the path of total, scorched earth annihilation, systematically destroying the lives of 6 official wives through a sequence of unimaginably cruel marriages. Henry's bizarre brand of loyalty, it turns out, was infinitely more terrifying and destructive than the unchecked promiscuity of any king in history. Part 4. Weaponizing an illegitimate son to psychologically destroy his wife. The year 1519 marked a suffocating milestone in the deteriorating marriage between Henry and Catherine of Aragon, with the birth of Henry Fitzroy. Instead of sweeping his illegitimate child by Bessie Blount into the shadows, Henry brazenly gave him a surname literally translating to son of the king. Fast forward to June 1525. Within Bridewell Palace, Henry orchestrated an unprecedented, lavish investiture ceremony to glorify this 6-year-old boy. Little Henry Fitzroy was simultaneously crowned Earl of Nottingham, Duke of Richmond, and Duke of Somerset, by aggressively decorating Fitzroy with titles strictly reserved for legitimate royal blood. Henry catapulted this bastard child to a position of supremacy, second only to the king himself. This theatrical gesture was a violent slap across the face of Queen Catherine. She passionately protested that a child born out of wedlock was being honored above her legitimate Princess Mary. But Henry was oblivious to his wife's shattered dignity. He only required a living exhibit to broadcast his flawless masculine virility. By elevating Fitzroy to the zenith of power, Henry transmitted a blade-like political threat. I am fully capable of producing strong male offspring. If the throne lacks a male heir, it is entirely the biological failure of the woman in my bed. Having proven his manhood, Henry's sexual strategy took a sinister turn. He developed a predatory preference for targeting already married women, most notably Mary Boleyn. The architecture of this strategy was chillingly clear. If a pregnancy occurred, the child could conveniently be attributed to the legal husband. Through this, Henry could satiate his urges and secretly validate his virility, brilliantly sidestepping any political fallout. He transformed the bedchamber into a political weapon designed to deflect all blame onto his wives. Yet, fate exacted a brutal toll. In July 1536, less than 2 months after he severed Anne Boleyn's head, 17-year-old Henry Fitzroy died of consumption. Henry suddenly lost the very son he had weaponized to humiliate the women in his life, violently realizing that his magnificent throne was teetering dangerously atop the graves of his own Tudor bloodline. Part 5. Blaming his wife for stinking to mask his own rotted, decaying impotence. Consider this terrifying reality, his godlike masculine prowess, only to face the terrifying reality that his physical vessel had entirely collapsed. Faced with this castrating truth, Henry VIII opted for the most cowardly route imaginable, annihilating the reputation of an innocent woman to build a fortress around his crumbling ego. In January 1540, Henry's introduction to his fourth bride, Anne of Cleves, was an unmitigated disaster. Frantically demanding an immediate annulment, Henry launched a vile, public attack in legally binding depositions. He aggressively testified to Thomas Cromwell that he liked her not, complaining that she had sagging breasts and emitted foul odors that killed his carnal desire. He pompously proclaimed to his physicians that he left her as good a maid as I found her, successfully reducing Anne to a global laughingstock. But the putrid truth hiding just beneath those insults represents history's ultimate sarcasm. While Henry was broadcasting that Anne of Cleves stank, secret medical ledgers painted a horrifying picture. It was Henry's own body that was literally rotting alive. Following a catastrophic 1536 jousting accident, Henry developed a chronic bone infection that collided with severe, unmanaged type 2 diabetes. His legs were marred by cavernous ulcers that constantly oozed putrid pus. The stench of necrotic flesh was so noxious that his chamber servants continuously burned incense and strong vinegar. desperate to mask the unmistakable scent of human decay saturating his bedroom. The agonizing irony hits like a physical blow. A man trapped in a failing biological shell, emanating the scent of a rotting corpse, had the absolute audacity to accuse a healthy princess of stinking. Why? Because it was the perfect, desperate smokescreen to conceal the humiliating reality that morbid obesity and diabetes had rendered him irreversibly impotent. His loud barrage of insults was merely the pathetic shield of a tyrant, terrified by his own agonizing deterioration. Part 6. The Final Reckoning. Physiological Collapse and Grotesque Physical Decay. We have now entered an era where the true horror is no longer found in courtly intrigue, but rather in the highly visible, tactile decay of a human being once worshipped as a towering emblem of strength. Diplomatic reports, most notably the unflinching observations by French Ambassador Charles de Marillac, painted a grim portrait of the aging king. The horrific ulcers ravaging Henry's calves would continuously scab over, only to violently burst open again, subjecting him to mind-numbing agony. Whenever the festering wounds sealed prematurely, the trapped infection triggered massive fevers and systemic sepsis that threatened to send the king to his grave at any moment. This unending physical torment culminated in a profoundly humiliating finale. Henry's obesity escalated to such an extreme degree that he weighed a staggering 180 kilograms with a 137-centimeter waistline, a measurement verified by the enormous suits of armor forged in his final years. Engineers were forced to construct specialized wooden wheelchairs and heavy-duty pulley systems just to haul his immobile bulk up the stairs or onto a horse. Marching in lockstep with his physical collapse was a disturbing distortion of his psychological state. The unspeakable humiliation of his physiological impotence reached a boiling point when he took his fifth bride, 17-year-old Catherine Howard. Put yourself in her shoes. On her wedding night, she confronted a decaying, monstrously deformed body crushing her, suffocated by the sickening stench of rotting flesh. Despite his burning desire to remain a virile conqueror, Henry's biology had mercilessly betrayed him. This profound inadequacy shoved the king into a dangerously paranoid state, frantically attempting to cover his shame. He drowned Catherine in priceless gifts, but the moment the illusion shattered, when he discovered she was seeking physical fulfillment elsewhere, Henry's festering humiliation exploded. Part 7. 7 years of obsessive pursuit. 3 years to shove her into the jaws of death. This represents the chilling crescendo of a blood-soaked reign, the undeniable proof that the love radiating from Henry VIII was nothing more than a selfish fever. And the second that fever broke, only a cold, calculating psychopathy was left behind. Fix your eyes upon these specific numbers: 7 years and 3 years. Henry willingly sacrificed 7 agonizing years feverishly drafting love letters to pursue Anne Boleyn. He tore down a 1,000-year-old religious institution just to hoist her onto the throne in 1533. Yet, a mere 1,000 days later, that all-consuming love had mutated into a signed warrant for her violent decapitation. The true cruelty does not merely lie in the execution itself. Instead of the traditional heavy axe, Henry ordered an elite French swordsman to ensure a swift, painless demise while a naive observer might interpret this as a final crumb of mercy. Historical archives reveal a blood-freezing truth. The mandate dispatching the executioner was signed by Henry's own hand days before Anne Boleyn's trial had even commenced. What does this signify? The grand theatrical courtroom production was nothing more than a rehearsed stage play. Anne's bloody fate was sealed long before she stepped into the dock. The blade had already been ordered while she sat in her cell clinging to the false hope of a fair verdict. And the sociopathy plunged even deeper. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, as a booming cannon signaled that the execution was finalized, Henry did not shed a single tear. The very next morning, while Anne's headless corpse was carelessly put away, Henry joyously celebrated his betrothal to Jane Seymour. A mere 11 days after Anne's death, he callously marched into a new marriage. King Henry VIII ultimately drew his last breath in 1547, rotting away atop an opulent bed in suffocating isolation. He traded away his entire lifetime, sacrificed his faith, and destroyed the women he claimed to love, all to violently hunt down a ghost, the perfect male heir. Yet, the universe delivered a highly poetic dose of irony. His illegitimate son, Fitzroy, perished young. His legitimate son, Edward VI, died shortly after taking the crown. In the final twist of fate, the singular figure who elevated the Tudor dynasty to its absolute pinnacle of global dominance was none other than Elizabeth I. The very daughter Henry had despised and branded a massive biological failure. The most profound lesson Henry leaves behind is this: when you treat human beings as entirely disposable tools, meant only to serve your narcissistic desires, your inevitable destination will always be utter isolation. Henry died entombed upon a bed of solid gold, yet not a single genuine wife was there to hold his rotting hand, and absolutely zero authentic love remained to mourn his passing. True immortality is forged entirely by the grace and respect with which we treat the souls who walk alongside us. What thoughts does this twisting narrative of Henry VIII invoke within you? Do you perceive him as a clinically deranged psychopath corrupted by power? Or simply as a pathetic man paralyzed by his own terror of being forgotten? Descend into the comment section below and leave your insights. And if diving into these shadowy slices of history has struck a chord, do not forget to hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe so you will not miss our future expeditions into the dark corners of humanity. Thank you sincerely for staying with us. See you in the next chapter.